Uh, I'm very glad to receive today in the CMRS webinar. You probably know, the audience knows that CMRS has had this tradition of holding CMRS seminars at the Tahrir campus for a great number of years. And it was has always been extremely well attended, especially when classes were in the old campus. Still, after the classes moved to the new campus, we still have good audiences. The audience from Cairo, less students probably than before, but more from among the refugees and migrants communities, from among international and national partners, and from academia of AUC and of universities other than AUC. We've had the pleasure of receiving some prominent personalities of the policy sphere, but of the academia sphere as well, and of the civil society. Uh, with COVID, we turned into webinars, and webinars have been well attended. I hope that the attendance will increase as we progress in this webinar. Today, we have another two prominent speakers in this webinar, the title of which is Fard, an NGO working as a nonprofit with Syrian migrants in Egypt. Our two speakers are Professor Dr. Laila El Baradei and Ms. Rasha Maati. Dr. Laila El Baradei is Professor of Public Administration at the Public Policy and Administration Department of the American University in Cairo. She acted as acting dean of the school in 2013-2014. She is extremely widely published, and she is collecting awards in publications and in research in general. And today's webinar, in fact, is about the subject of an award she received. She received an award from Sage Publications about a case she wrote in a non-profit organization she called Insan. And this Insan uh, was working as a non-profit with Syrian migrants in Egypt. And as I said, it received the Sage's Editor's Choice Award for leadership for this year. This award is given annually to an author of a case that demonstrates excellence in its category. This is a subject of honor for PPAD, for the school, for the colleagues of Dr. Laila El Baradei, and for AUC at large. We are very happy to receive you, Dr. Laila, to talk to us about the subject of your research. Our other speaker today, our second speaker, is Ms. Rasha Maati, and I'm very glad to receive her. And I think we should have received her in this webinar series long ago. She does an excellent and magnificent job as an executive director of Fard. Fard is a foundation uh, registered as an Egyptian NGO that works with migrants, refugees, and the host communities hosting migrants and refugees in Egypt. And Fard has played a very important, very significant role in the humanitarian crisis that resulted from the displacement of Syrian populations, the Syrian refugees who arrived in Egypt after the turmoil in Syria. The Fard has been recognized here, there, time and again for its the prominent role that it has been playing, and in fact, we attended together one of the meetings that Fard was invited to in Istanbul a few years ago to talk about its experience. You're most welcome, Ms. Rasha Maati, in this webinar. Usually what we do is that we listen to the guests for 25, 30 minutes, and then we open the floor for discussion, for debates, for questions, for comments. Um, Usually I start with a few comments, with a few questions, and afterwards the floor is open. I will leave it to you to organize yourselves, to distribute the work in the manner that fits your purposes best. So I will not intervene. You have 25, 30, 40 minutes if you wish, and then we will engage in the discussion. So now I leave it to Dr. Laila El Baradei and to Ms. Rasha Maati to do their presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim Awad, for the compliments. I don't think I deserve all these compliments, but you're always very generous with your colleagues, and I'm really privileged to be a colleague of yours at the Public Policy and Administration Department. And my talk today is about a case study, as you well pointed out, a case study of Fard Foundation that was founded by Mrs. Rasha Maati. We're very happy that she's joining us. And I'm here because of her, basically. The role of academics is to just document what's happening in real life and success stories and the challenges faced by different organizations, be these organizations public or nonprofit. And the whole reason I'm here participating in this seminar is because of the excellent work performed by Mrs. Rasha Maati and her foundation, Fard Foundation. Although the case that I published through SAGE was referred to as Insan Foundation, but it was a pseudonym. But with the permission of Mrs. Rasha Maati, we will use the real name for the foundation, which is Fard. And I'll just present what Fard is doing and how I tackled the performance of Fard through writing up the case study. And then we will leave the floor for the questions and answers. And definitely Mrs. Maati will be the best resource in answering to the questions and comments and reflections shared by the audience. So I'd like to just reflect a little bit on why we write case studies. As academics, we like to make sure that what we are talking about in the lecture halls and in the classes are related to what's happening in reality, and make sure that there is a link between theory and practice. And one of the best ways to achieve this link between theory and practice is to discuss case studies. So case studies are usually based on real organizations, challenges faced by the managers or the founders of these organizations, and then it's left to the students to figure out what is the best way to proceed with resolving a specific problem or a number of challenges faced in reality by these organizations. Case studies are also important for documentation purposes, that we would like to document what's happening in reality and related to what we discuss in class and what's there in the literature. It also challenges students to try to put themselves and empathize with managers and with the chief executive officers of organizations when they face dilemmas. And it's usually not one specific dilemma, as in, for example, the way they study in textbooks, but multitude of dilemmas and problems may be faced, different variables affect their performance. So it's very challenging to students to try to resolve the problems as presented in case studies, and they get to understand that there is no one right answer to the questions or to the issues that we refer to in the case study. So it's a practicing ground for them, preparing them for what they're going to encounter once they get to work in reality and deal with issues in real life. Many of our graduate students are already working, but yet they get to experience the challenges and the real work experience in other organizations through dealing with case studies. And why Fard Foundation? Did I choose Fard Foundation? For many different reasons. I'd like also to mention that this is the first published case, and fortunately I got an award for the case published, not because of anything, but because of the challenging work performed by the organization, the multitude of challenges that they face while trying to achieve their vision and mission in Egypt, the committed leadership manifested in Mrs. Rasha Maati and her co-founders for the foundation. There is a high level of commitment, not the regular business as usual type of work that is sometimes performed in other nonprofits, but they are really committed. They have a noble cause that they want to achieve. They want to create a better environment for the Syrian migrants and refugees in Egypt. And not only that, but they have a wider vision of investing in humans. And that's why the name Fard was maybe chosen, and Rasha can elaborate on that further. And then the creative approach that they are adopting and using in trying to achieve their objectives. I'm here talking within the Center of Migration and Refugee Studies, so definitely the attendees are all experts about refugees and migrants, but just a small synopsis about the Syrian refugees crisis. The civil war that started in 2011 and led to large numbers of Syrians being displaced. 5 million Syrians at least migrated out of Syria. 6 million Syrians were internally displaced. At least 1 million Syrians moved to Europe and to other destinations. The majority of the Syrian refugees that settled in the Arab region went to Iraq, Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and to Egypt as well. And in Egypt, the one estimated figure for the number of Syrian refugees may be in the range of 5 million or more. These figures are contested and they change over time. There was a huge influx in 2012. And at that point in time, when it was the President Morsi, the President of the Republic, and the Muslim Brothers, it was said that there was greater receptivity for the Syrian migrants and refugees coming into Egypt. But after June 30th, there were stricter entry regulations imposed. Many families got separated. I got to learn from Rasha about how many Syrian families sent the grandchildren to Egypt with the grandmother and the grandfather. Then they were not capable of joining them later on. And residence permits, when they need to be renewed, sometimes the Syrian migrants and refugees face complications in dealing with the Egyptian bureaucracy. Egypt provides them, yes, with educational and health services, but we will see that there are a lot of challenges when they get to receive the educational and health services. Sending the kids, for example, to public schools is not always that easy. There is, we cannot say a language barrier, but there is a dialect barrier sometimes. And Syrian children, unfortunately, when they attend the public schools with other Egyptian students, they may be subjected to bullying and harassment by the other children. They may not be capable of following the Egyptian slang dialect sometimes. They are accepted into the schools, many of them based on age, not based on any kind of rigorous assessment to figure out what level of literacy or numeracy skills they have, and based on that allocating them to the different years in school, but it's only based on their age. And sometimes these Syrian students coming over to Egypt would have skipped a number of years during their journey to Egypt. So they face a lot of problems in catching up with the rest of the children at school. Syrian women refugees and migrants in Egypt face a number of compounded problems. Syrian women are beautiful and attractive, and therefore they are subjected to a greater level of harassment even compared to Egyptian women, to the extent that many of them prefer to stay at home, and they miss out on schooling, those who are of a younger age, and they find sometimes difficulty in integrating with the Egyptian society. Fard Foundation started as an initiative, informal initiative in 2012, in trying to help out the hundreds or even thousands of Syrian women and children. Basically, this was the starting point, focusing on women and children in Cairo, and trying to help them settle in and trying to help them meet their basic needs and requirements. So what I'm presenting here is the work performed by Fard in trying to achieve that goal, the challenges it faced and continues to face, and what programs it delivers to the Syrian migrants and refugees. So the idea started by Rasha. I'm referring to Rasha on an informal basis, if she'll accept that, as a single individual. She is of Syrian descent, but she's Egyptian. And she tried to help the families, the Syrian families coming over, out of just a sense of duty and a commitment to helping others. So she related how she went out and knocked on doors of Syrian families, trying to assess their needs, trying to figure out who needs housing, who needs medication, those who are suffering from chronic diseases, trying to help them with the registration process with the UNHCR, and just as an individual, as Fard Rasha, and then later joined by other co-founders, she achieved a lot, and she believed in the importance of the cause that she was aiming at, and therefore she exerted a lot of effort in trying to help out the Syrian refugees and the Syrian migrants in Egypt. It was a very difficult situation in 2012, right after the start of the civil war in Egypt, when there was an influx of refugees coming in. Many of them were injured. Many of them had shrapnel injuries, and they didn't know what to do about it. They needed medical assistance. They may not have had the necessary financial means to afford the medical assistance. They didn't have the required papers that would help them settle in legally and formally in Egypt. So they needed various types of assistance and help. The starting point was collecting data and helping them to register and get their papers straight. Fard Foundation has a declared vision of becoming the leading regional NGO fostering and investing in individuals. So investing in individuals, again, the notion of the individual Fard, which is the name of the foundation, to help them fulfill their potential and have a positive impact in the community. And we note here that the vision statement does not mention Syrians. It's not limited to Syrians, but I think with the notion that after a while, maybe the problems of the Syrian migrants and refugees will be resolved, and therefore Fard may continue to cater to the needs of the Egyptian community, regardless of the nationality. The mission, how they perform what they are there for, is through providing community services, through providing educational services, and through helping the migrants and refugees earn a living and earn a sustainable income. When the Fard Foundation started early on, when they first started their effort, other than the initiative to collect the data and help the migrants and refugees with the paperwork and with having access to the necessary medication, they started an informal schooling initiative, catering basically to the Syrian students who dropped out of school. And then after this, they expanded their efforts and they went into implementing an economic empowerment program and a human care program. These are the titles used for the different programs that they implement. So we'll try to just elaborate a little bit on each of these programs to explain what they are all about and how the Fard Foundation moved from an early phase of just distributing clothes, providing medical assistance, housing, registering the migrants, and the important data gathering effort, into a second phase where it got to register itself as a foundation with the Egyptian government. And it provided 3 different types of programs, all serving Syrian migrants and refugees. In the majority of the beneficiaries are the Syrian migrants and refugees. It's now offering an economic empowerment program, an innovative learning program. This is the new title for the educational effort that's being performed, and a human care program, all delivered in a very creative manner. For example, the innovative learning program, when they started their informal school, they discovered that there were a lot of dropout students for many different reasons. Either they couldn't afford the cost of the education. It's a public school, yes, but there is a cost entailed. They need uniform, they need lunches, they need transportation, they need private tutoring in order to be able to continue in a public school. Other reasons for dropping out had to do with psychological reasons, psychological trauma they went into as a result of the migration, as a result of the civil war, as a result of the family being separated. Some had medical problems and some had issues related to disability. The challenges faced by starting the informal school at the beginning were numerous. During the first year of operation, they discovered that at least a quarter of the students enrolled were illiterate. They couldn't read and write. It's not just that they were finding difficulty in catching up with their schooling material, but they were illiterate, so they needed a lot of intensive coaching. Therefore, they started using volunteering Syrian tutors to try to help out the students and help them learn how to read and write in order to be able to enroll in the public schools. There was a funding problem as well. They needed donations to help with paying the teachers, with the school supplies. There was also an important location issue. The informal schooling initiative started in a residential area. And then after a number of maybe a couple of years of operation, it was deemed as a serious problem to have the school operating in the residential area in the 6th of October. And the government government officials said that they have to move to an administrative zone. The relocation was going to be very expensive for the foundation. Buying out space in a residential zone was really quite expensive. They couldn't afford it, and they had to shut down operations for a while until they managed to find sources of funding to help them move partly at least to the administrative zone. The other problems related with the schooling operations, as mentioned earlier, was the bullying that the children experienced in our public schools, unfortunately. Anybody who's not an Egyptian, who's perceived to have a different dialect, gets to be bullied. We all know how children can be very mean to one another at an early age. The government of Egypt was also keen on getting children accepted in public schools, and just listing the numbers of children, migrant children who are accepted, regardless of the quality of the education that they are getting, regardless of their level of preparedness, and without having any formal assessment mechanism to check to what extent they can be accepted in a certain level in the school, and to what extent they can be able to move forward. What Fard Foundation did is that they started providing psychological support to the children to help them face the different issues they had, and another after-school program to help them catch up. They also allowed them to come to the informal schooling during maybe 4 days of the week or 5 days of the week, but they had to go to the public school to maintain their registration status in the school on Thursday, 1 day a week. This was the minimum that they had to show up in the public school for the sake of getting a certificate at the end. And this would help them later on if they want to continue with a career, or to have some recognition for the education that they got. They needed to stay in the public school, but it was a formality just to end up with a certificate. The actual education took place in the parallel informal schooling set up by the foundation. It was their way of dealing with the challenge. Additionally, in the second type of program they provided to Syrian women and men was the economic empowerment program. They wanted to help them make a living on a sustainable basis. So they established a vocational training center for women. They tried out teaching them different skills, but they found out that what worked best and what really was sustainable were the cooking classes and the crochet classes. And it was not the regular traditional crocheting classes that many NGOs just teach their beneficiaries. I was impressed that they developed the art of toy making and imigromi, which is, I think, borrowed from the Japanese culture, imigromi, so that they taught the Syrian women how to make up very exquisite types of toys, and then they marketed these toys under a brand name, Knitties. And for each toy, they would write up a story explaining the character and the personality of the toy, and this would really help them in marketing the toy to the kids and in finding a niche in the Egyptian market whereby they can sell their products, sell the Syrian women's produced products. So it's not just a regular traditional skill as happens in other NGOs and non-profits, but it's something based on research, and it's a plus that they're giving to the Syrian women. For men, also they managed to provide them with vocational training and home renovation related skills. And the edge that they had here was that they were trying to give them a certification, not just teaching them plumbing or carpentry as the usual business, but helping them achieve certification. And they partnered with City and Guild accreditation body in London to provide certification to the workers. So again, this is where the creativity of Fard is witnessed once more. In addition to the educational efforts and the economic development programs, they offer also a human care program in parallel, doing the usual thing, distributing food bags, hot meals, organizing Ramadan iftars for groups, providing psychosocial support, clothes exhibition at reduced prices, caring for the elderly, the grandparents who came to Egypt with the grandchildren without the parents being available. So the human care program worked in parallel with the other programs. But it was not and is not currently, I think, and Rasha can elaborate further, it was not an easy path. There were a lot of challenges that were faced. Some of these challenges they may have managed to overcome, but other challenges still continue. Including the unfulfilled needs, the plethora of unfulfilled needs. They require still more funding, and migrants and refugees still have a lot of unfulfilled needs, and they still need to do more work in order to try to meet those needs. One other challenge is that the many volunteering Syrian medical staff left after 2013. They were no longer welcome in Egypt, and they're not able to practice. I think the Egyptian law does not allow non-Egyptians to practice medicine here. Syrians after 2013 faced some antagonism from the Egyptian communities in some rural villages and even urban areas. They perceived the Syrians to be coming over to take from them the available job opportunities. And there were these misconceptions that we are an impoverished nation, so why should we really cater to the needs of the Syrians? We have our own set of problems and needs. So this was presented in some sort of antagonism against the Syrians. To add to that list was the government's bureaucracy. All right, we all deal with the Egyptian government bureaucracy and how we know how rigid it is, but this is compounded when it gets to be with the migrants and refugees. And as a nonprofit organization or as a foundation, similar to other nonprofits and foundations in Egypt, now it's very difficult to collect donations. There are a lot of security issues that have to be met and security permissions. The Ministry of Social Solidarity staff, they weren't clear at a certain point about what Fard Foundation is doing and why they're catering to both Syrians and Egyptians. Another challenge is how the government was always keen on numbers when it came to education and enrolling the Syrian kids in schools. What mattered to them were the numbers, and they were always there bragging about the numbers of Syrians admitted to the public schools, regardless of the quality of education that was offered, regardless of whether those Syrian kids were capable of catching up and really absorbing the educational material, regardless of the receptivity for the kids in the school, maybe the bullying that they were getting and the harassment from the other kids. The location of the educational center was also a serious challenge, whether to continue operating informally and providing the service to the migrant kids that needed the educational service and needed the support educationally and psychologically to enable them to continue in the public schools. They needed this parallel support, but operating in a residential area at an affordable price was difficult and was really a challenge and was not approved by the government. So they faced the dilemma: should we move to the residential area and maybe downsize our operations, or should we continue in the residential area? And there were a number of tensions in the relationship between the foundation, the government, and other donors. Some of these tensions, as I perceived them, was the need by the Egyptian government to regulate the work of the foundation. And at the same time, the foundation was looking for a greater degree of flexibility. The government should be really a little bit more flexible in dealing with an NGO or a foundation serving migrants and refugees. The other tension was the tension between the fact that the Egyptian government is a signatory to international conventions that dictate that we should accept the migrants and refugees, and Dr. Ibrahim Awad can correct me here. And then the perception that by some Egyptians that we should not be accepting additional burdens and that we are already an impoverished nation and we have our own problems and we cannot really bear any further problems or challenges. Thirdly, the tension between the foundation trying to serve its beneficiaries and the competition for donor fundings by other NGOs and other civil society organizations also aspiring to receive donor funding and get their services funded. Finally, this idea of government wanting to register the migrants in the public schools, but the fact that they're not receiving any real education in the public schools. So the case study is not providing solutions, but really just posing a number of questions. Some discussion questions, I'll just throw them in, is how can a country like Egypt balance the economic considerations with the humanitarian values when accepting migrants and refugees? Can we have a win-win situation? Can the government work more effectively and more flexibly with nonprofits like Fard Foundation, or it should be just following the standard operating procedures and regulations? The other thing is to what extent governments should deal with the flexibility in accepting and managing the education of migrants and refugees. It's not about just enrolling them in schools and that's it, but there should be a different way of helping them out, maybe giving them additional support. And the idea that, again, the Fard Foundation is operating in a residential area because this is what it can afford, and it's allowing the kids to skip formal schooling on maybe the majority of the school days, but all for a good cause. Is this what should be allowed to happen, or should we think of other ways of operating? Finally, what potential strategies can be pursued by the Fard Foundation over the coming years to enhance its level of effectiveness, taking into account all these challenges that it's trying to overcome, and how can it serve the Syrian migrants and refugees in a better way? So I think it's much easier for academics. We document and we pose questions and we leave it to the practitioners like Rasha to figure out how to resolve the challenges. And I'm here to listen to what Rasha has to say. Thank you very much. And thanks once again to Rasha for giving me this opportunity and allowing me to interview her for lengthy hours and giving me access to this very creative foundation and what they're doing and what they are trying to accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laila El Baradei, for your very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. Before I give the floor to Ms. Rasha Maati, let me just add to my presentation of her that Ms. Maati is a statistician by education. She has a degree in statistics from University of Concordia in Montreal. And very interestingly, she is half Egyptian, half Syrian, which is quite interesting when we look at the question of integration of Syrian refugees. She probably is a representation of the multiple identities that we all have, and this probably enables her to do the job that she chose for herself. And something else quite interesting that I noticed, that before she engaged in working in setting up Fard, she was a freelance researcher in order to reconcile work and family responsibilities, which is a challenge for all working women. This is extremely interesting also when we discuss the issues at hand, whether for refugees or for host communities. Thank you very much, Dr. Laila. I will answer your question later and have some observations, but after listening to Ms. Maati, please.
Thank you, Dr. Laila, for a great presentation. And I congratulate you again on the award. And thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for the excellent introduction. I don't know what to add after all what Dr. Laila has introduced, but I wanted to focus probably on the challenges a bit. And because since the case study has been done, a lot of changes, occurred. You've talked about the school, you've talked about the vocational training center. Well, the school has closed because of the challenges 2 years ago. The duration of the school was like a 4-year program. It helped a lot of out-of-school children. It was very beneficial to bringing them back to schooling. But we had to shut down the project because of the challenges that you mentioned. One of the main challenges was the regulatorily, the Ministry of Social Solidarity's requirements for us to be registered as a school, which is also a license that we have to obtain from the Ministry of Education. So you get a lot of, regulations in there that could not be met. One other challenge is the funding. This project was self-funded, through donations, generous donations from donors, but we could not sustain it for long. So it has to be shut after 4 years. But what we had, like you always said about, you talked about challenges and how we overcome challenges. So what we did is this is what we could do at the end. We had to help the most vulnerable children that were in the school. So we kept on paying their tuition fees, and we located them in other Syrian schools. So we continued paying their tuition especially for the most vulnerable. But the good news is that we are in the process of opening another school, but this time it's going to be formal. It's going to be targeting out-of-school children, whether they'll be Egyptians from the refugee community, if they meet the criteria for the out-of-school children that's set by the Ministry of Education. And for sustainability, we have, yes, you have something?
There's a lot of background noise, Rasha.
Okay.
I didn't want to disturb you.
Yes, I was saying that we're about to open a school for out-of-school children. This time is going to be official. It's going to be with the Ministry of Education, serving Egyptians and refugee community. And for sustainability, we have a generous donor who's building us a school. So this time we don't have to rent or care about regulations, because it's going to be an area for non-profit buildings. So it's going to meet the criteria. You mentioned the challenges. Most Ministry of Social Solidarity and their understanding of the work we do. This is one of the most challenges. We get sometimes funding. An example that a year and a half ago, we got funding from Save the Children. It was a funding that was going to sustain the school. But because in the grant contract, Save the Children mentioned safe spaces for children. بيئة آمنة بالعربي. بيئة آمنة, safe space. They could not understand what a safe space means. So the definition itself, not understanding this definition, they stopped the project. They said, we don't understand what a safe space means. Although we explained, so we rejected the fund and it led to closing the school. So understanding the scope of the work that we do by Ministry of Social Solidarity is one of our biggest challenges. When we talk about, this is for the education, if we want to talk about the economic empowerment, the challenges that we're facing now is we try to equip refugees with the vocational training skills that you mentioned and other training skills, but the challenge is beyond that, because we try also to link them to employment. And linking them to employment means we have to find them a job, which is not easy because of the regulations, the Ministry of Labor regulations, because as refugees, they cannot be employed formally. And this is what we try to do. We're trying to equip them with skills so they can get formal employment, and this is not the case. We've been trying to go around this for many years now, but we don't have anything yet, you know, because the regulation says if you employ as an employer, if you employ 10 Egyptians, you can employ a non-refugee, which is sometimes very difficult, and they are equipped and they are skilled. And from, you know, after we equip them with the skills, employers want to employ them, they are eager to employ them, but they are faced with the regulations from the Ministry of Labor. So this is also another challenge that's facing us, you know, after that we provide the service, you know. So because at the end, the final, you know, the final objective is to economic empowerment, is to find them a job, which is sometimes very, most of the time is very difficult. These are some of the challenges. Of course, funding is always a challenge, especially after COVID. There was a lot of, you know, donors that we depend on, the donations have been cut off. So we minimized our work, you know, and we limited our work to certain areas and certain numbers of people, the most vulnerable that we could help. But now, you know, I think the economy is recovering a bit, and people are coming back and becoming more generous during these days, especially we're approaching Ramadan. So I hope this continues, and with this would make our work much easier, especially with the scarce funding and the regulations that are, you know, because we're always regulated with the Ministry of Social Solidarity regulations when it comes to funding. So we can apply, we always apply for projects and funding, but to obtain this, you know, to obtain approvals from the ministry to be able to take the funding, this takes time. So this deters donors from, you know, accepting NGOs as recipients of grants. So this is one of the challenges as well. They like the work, they like the proposals that we give, but because they know that funding takes time, approvals for funding takes time, so they get deterred. So they go and probably either they deal with companies or the private sector, or they deal with international NGOs, which is easier to obtain funding, and there's no regulations on that. You know, this is, I talked a bit about funding, about the challenges. So if anyone would like to ask questions, I think it would be much interactive if we can open discussions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Rasha Maati, for your presentation and for adding the latest developments and the latest challenges and the opportunities that Fard could seize in the last 2 years and more recently. Before I give the floor to our audience, let me just point out a few things. First, to reply to the question raised by Dr. El Baradei, Egypt is party to the 1951 Convention, to the 1969 Convention of the OAU Convention on Refugees in Africa, and both conventions compel Egypt compel all parties to accept refugees. But in fact, you don't have to be a party to a convention to be obliged to all countries, all states under international customary law are compelled not to refool, not to reject anyone who seeks protection in their territories. This is the non-refoulement norm. And we have seen that in the region, Lebanon is not a party to the 1950 Convention, Jordan is not a party, Iraq is not a party, and yet they received refugees. I'd like to say that what you both said tallies very well with a research project that we did at CMRS. We did a project, in fact, it has not finished yet, on the entitlement of different national groups of refugees in Egypt. And all of what you said comes up very clearly in this project, whether about education and bullying, about informal education as complementary education, all of this really comes very, very clearly. The question of employment. Egypt has no reservation on employment in the 1951 Convention, and yet it applies labor law, because labor law requires that foreign workers not be above 1% in an establishment. So the refugees are not, in fact, treated as refugees. They are treated as migrants. I think what is quite interesting in the question of competition for jobs. In fact, all research, not only in Egypt, everywhere, has shown that there is no competition between migrants and refugees on the one hand and native population, native or nationals on the other hand, because labor markets are segmented. Refugees and migrants do not do the same jobs that nationals do. But of course, there is a political environment, and there is a political environment that either tolerates this course or at times may use the same language. And this is quite important. I think that when you look at the reception and integration of refugees, we should always take into account the political context where they are. I do not want to go longer, but just to underscore the importance of the individual and the initiative that Ms. Rasha has taken. Structures may exist, challenges may exist, but the individual is important in creating the conducive environment. In fact, what we can see is that a crisis, this refugee crisis, was seized as an opportunity. It was seized as an opportunity to build an effective, efficient, and fighting for the right things civil society organization. So you have the challenge, the famous challenge and response. Societies respond, even if they are stifled. Even if they are stifled, there is always a way to react and to respond. The informal or non-formal school that existed closed down. Now there will be a formal school that comes up. This is really a great success. I think it's a great success. And I will have a question for you, which is, did you receive any technical assistance in your activities? For instance, in non-formal education, did you receive any technical assistance from UNICEF, from UNESCO? So this will be a question you will have time to reply to this question. But I'll stop here, and I have a number of questions. And the first question, in fact, that has come through the chat function is from a very, very prominent international expert, researcher international civil servant in the refugee domain, who is Jeff Crisp. So Jeff, I will not read your question, but I will leave it to you to raise it just as a preliminary reply. Syrian refugees are not only in Cairo or in the surroundings of Cairo. They are in several provinces in Egypt since they arrived in 2011, 2012, 2013. So because this was Jeff's question, but I will leave it to you to formulate your question and add to it if you wish. And then we'll have Carlos and others. Please, Jeff.
I have to talk.
Jeff is joining us from Oxford. Okay. Hello, Jeff, go ahead.
You're muted, sir.
You're muted, Jeff.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, very simple question. I was in Cairo a few years ago at the early stage of the Syrian refugee influx, and there were some signs that refugees were moving out of Cairo, particularly up to Alexandria and other places near the Mediterranean. And I just wondered over the past few years, the extent to which refugees have moved out of Cairo and taken up residence in other parts of the country where I guess the cost of living is somewhat cheaper.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for your question. As for Syrian refugees, it was not the cost of living that would dictate where they live. It's what they did before they came to Egypt. And this is something I noticed when we started visiting different cities around, in Alexandria, Dumyata, the Suez cities. I've noticed that when we started doing data collection about the people there, the whole community comes from the same city in Syria, same city, not even like small urban city, rural cities. So I was asking why. Let's like an example in Dumyata. Dumyata is known for woodwork in Egypt. It's the capital of woodworking. And I noticed that people are there from a town called Sa'ba and Hamuriya, which is on the outskirts of Damascus. And when I asked why are they all from there, the answer came because they work in woodwork in Syria. So when they came to Syria, they were smart enough to find, to locate their living where in the cities where there would be economical potential for them. You would find in Alexandria people who come from coastal cities in Tartus and Latakia. They all moved to move to Alexandria or Port Said for that matter. In 6th of October city, which hosts around 45% of most of the Syrian refugees, you'll find people who are merchants. Who comes from Homs and Damascus because they open their shops, they open their restaurants there. So it depends, and this is something I heard from UNHCR in some of the meetings. Syrian refugees have tired us because they are all over the place. You will find them in agriculture area where there's agriculture. Unlike other refugees who are they are located in certain areas for Libyans. They are in Cairo. Sudanese are in Cairo and Alexandria only. So it depends on the city for where there's a big community for other refugees. But for Syrians, no, they're all over the place. So it doesn't dictate, the prices of living. It does not dictate where they live. It's what they do for living. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there is here also the network theory effect. Networks bring those coming from the same community or the same village, they bring each other. This is the famous network theory. Carlos, do you have a question, Carlos? And I will ask Elena to come in with any comments she might have in respect of the entitlement projects. Carlos?
Yes, yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, go ahead.
Okay, yes. First of all, thank you very much for both the presentation and the work that you are doing. I find this to be truly remarkable, and also for CMRS to give us a possibility to attend this webinar. My question is, it comes from a bit of experience I had in the Dominican Republic, where I was 2 years ago. I was there for 5 years, and I saw the influx of Venezuelan people coming in waves in different moments of those 5 years. And I started noticing that many NGOs, and I was part of a couple of them, think tanks and action tanks, we were trying to include those highly skilled, well-educated, and in some cases empowered Venezuelans that were coming to the Dominican Republic in order to help us attend the Venezuelan population that was coming into the country. So I was wondering if you have been doing some of the same. I mean, incorporating some of the highest skilled, empowered Syrians based in Cairo to help you face some of the challenges that you have encountered. And once again, thank you very much.
Yes, hi, Carlos. We did exactly this. First of all, we found that we are giving them an employment option because it's really difficult for them to get employed. So we are providing an economic opportunity for those refugees. So we have them, and you have them in different fields. For the school, we had 95 staff. Last year of the school, we had 95 staff. They were all Syrians. Mostly women, 85% were women. So we were giving an opportunity for teachers, Syrian teachers, to have a job. And also it helped us encounter the problem that the children have, dealing with a different culture, dealing with a different dialect. So it was our opportunity for both, for the migrants themselves or the refugees themselves to get employed, and for the children, to get assistance from like-minded, like the same culture teachers who understand their dialect and everything. In other areas, in the organization itself, we had almost 60-70% of the workers at the organization, they were Syrians. The caseworkers, the data collectors, we empowered them, we gave them training, and they were able to understand more the culture. They were, even for a caseworker to visit a home, it was easier. He understands the culture of the refugees. They know the families themselves, the names, the families. So it was easier for us to collect data versus, hiring local workers. Even in the economic empowerment section of the vocational training centers that we have, we trained women and they became the trainers. So also giving them opportunity to work. So yes, we did, do exactly what as you asked.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rasha. Any other questions? I can see that Elena has left. Any other question comment from the audience? There is someone, Heba, go ahead, please.
Heba.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation and amazing work. My question actually pertains to the inclusion of Egyptian. I think Dr. El Baradei mentioned a point about expanding your services to include Egyptians, not only Syrian. So I'm curious on how did this idea come about? Could it be somehow related to overcoming, for example, the funding challenge? Said differently, I suppose, do you think the inclusion of locals in your services could actually facilitate the funding challenge and enhance the governmental flexibility? I hope it's a clear question.
Yes, it is. We started including not only Syrians, like we started with Syrians, but then we started including more refugees. Like we have Eritreans in our database, Eritreans, Yemenis, Sudanese, Ethiopians, different nationalities, Syrians and Egyptians as well. Because we are an NGO, which is Egyptian setting, there's a lot of people who are vulnerable within our area, within the area that we work in. So we started including, Egyptians as well in our programs. It's not just because of funding problems. It's because that we started because there was a crisis, and that's why our focus was on to try to solve the problems created by this crisis. And then now we are in a phase that the Syrians have been living here for like 7-9 years or so. So it's not a crisis anymore. So we're dealing with the most vulnerable, regardless of their nationality. And on the contrary, sometimes the fundings come for Syrians or for refugees, and we talk to the donor and convince them that we want to have it like 50-50, 50 host community or 30-70 host community, and the majority would be refugees. So it's earmarked for refugees, but then we, convince the donor to include Egyptians as well. As for the schooling that we're going to be doing, it's going to be for out-of-school children. This was a challenge to try to find information about out-of-school children, Egyptian out-of-school children, because there is not a clear data, to locate the out-of-school children. And so we started doing a kind of a mapping of the area we work in. We started this 2 years ago. We mapped the whole area, which is like a district in 6th of October. And we had a vision of doing a mapping of all of October, but we were stopped because of security clearances or stuff like that. But this is what we intend to do later on. And there's a lot of out-of-school children, Egyptian out-of-school children, that we want to work with. We want to use all the experience that we gained throughout the past 4 years to implement it to Egyptian out-of-school children and any refugee or migrant children who will be in the area. So it's kind of a strategic decision that we took to deal with refugees and non-refugees, like Egyptians and refugees, like dealing with the community, regardless of the nationality.
Thank you very much. This is good policy. In fact, this is advocated policy that you develop the community as well, the hosting community, because the community also in Egypt, you have needy Egyptians. So we don't want also to create hostility, to create frictions between the communities. And this is done all over, in fact. So congratulations to Fard for having done that. Elena is back. Elena, would you have anything to say about your project, the entitlement projects, and how it tallies with everything that we listened to from Dr. El Baradei and Ms. Maati?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm very sorry. I actually had to leave the webinar early because we have our own project training that we started at 3:30. So I've missed approximately the last 45 minutes. But
say a few words and go back to your training anyways.
No, that's okay. So just to kind of give a brief background, and I think knowing, because we thankfully were able to, my former colleague Claire was able to talk to Ms. Rasha about the wonderful work that Fard is doing as part of our research. But basically what we're trying to do with our project, and as I'm sure Dr. Laila and Ms. Rasha had mentioned, is to just kind of see what legal entitlements are owed to refugees and asylum seekers and failed asylum seekers, which obviously include Syrians as the largest registered refugee group within Egypt under UNHCR. And to also discuss with the different NGOs and CBOs the work that they are doing, but also the challenges they're facing and how we might work through these challenges to create, as Ms. Rasha just mentioned, better policy for refugees and migrants. And thankfully right now, as I mentioned, we are conducting trainings with the different communities yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Actually, We have the Arabic training, so the Syrian community members that we worked with in our training are present and are receiving the training to then hopefully train their community members as well under these different entitlements. And then hopefully after we train the communities, which has been very successful so far, we will start engaging the stakeholders like Fard and others on our project findings and how we can best work to create better policy and to best assist the refugees and migrants within Egypt, including the Syrians. So,
thank you, Elena, and thanks to Fard for having contributed to our project as well.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Rasha.
I wanted to add something. We talked about challenges, but we haven't talked about overcoming challenges. I just wanted to mention something that throughout our work, one of the things that kept us going is partnerships, building partnerships with the host community, each in its field. One of our biggest, supporters for the school was the international schools in Egypt. We had a lot of support from Cairo American College, the BISC, the American School in Egypt, the Shweifat. They were our biggest partner, our biggest supporter. What we did is, we tried to inform them, inform the children, inform the students about the refugee crisis and about, giving them presentations and about the situation itself. So they know what is a migrant, what is a refugee, and the difference between both. And then we get them to empathize with the cause, and then they would be rallying, supporting our cause. They supported us with furniture, with equipment, with trips. Partnerships are excellent. Shweifat at one stage opened their school for us to do our summer camp, bringing us buses. So partnerships is very important in the work of NGOs, and but once you convey the cause that you are rallying, and others will start rallying themselves for your cause. We did this with economic empowerment, connecting and partnering with industries, big industry names for vocations, to try to employ refugees later on once they're trained. We did this with big chain restaurants like Mori Sushi and Tamara and big names. So once you get these partnerships on and you get people understanding the cause, then they will be your supporters. Because not always supporting is not always only comes in funding, but finding solutions to the problems that we're facing. So this is one thing I wanted to mention.
Thank you very much. It's very, very, very interesting and very important. In fact, when I asked you whether you received technical assistance, I was thinking in terms of UNICEF or UNESCO, but you came up with a more interesting reply, in fact.
Actually, unfortunately, we did not. We did not receive any technical support from any of the international NGOs because their mandate was the government's mandate. They were focusing on putting the children in public schools, not alternative learning. Although they understand, although they appreciate the work we did, but this was their mandate, is to put the children into public school, not alternative learning centers. So they were there. They were always supported by verbally encouraging us, but we did not get any support from any of the international NGOs.
They have the restrictions as well. Even though UNICEF, for instance, has good knowledge about informal and non-formal education. One of our colleagues, Dr. Laila Zalouk, has been working for years in non-formal
community schools.
education.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But probably formal community schools. We were informal. That's
I know. Malak was working in informal and non-formal education. So thank you very much. But now let me ask Dr. Laila if she wants to make comments, to discuss what has been said, and discuss the discussion really before we still have like 12, 13 minutes.
Right. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for making this opportunity happen and for me to learn about the new developments related to Fard Foundation. I was thinking that if I now have the opportunity, I can update the case. and
another award, and another award.
No, another
You're always
award.
welcome. You're always welcome.
Fard Foundation deserves multiple awards with what
Yes,
they're doing.
it does.
And they are continuously progressing and managing to find the further creative ways to overcome the many challenges they face. I have a question for you, Dr. Ibrahim, as the guru of migration and refugee studies, about the role of government, the role of the Egyptian government. The official statement by the government is that we're doing marvelously in terms of the Syrian refugees and migrants in Egypt, and we're not treating them even as refugees and migrants, we're treating them as full citizenship. So they're given perfect preferential treatment. But what is reality? And we've signed all the necessary conventions, and but what is reality and what is lacking? What is it that the government can do more and better to serve the refugees in comparison with what other countries in the region are doing? So you just hinted to the fact that Lebanon is not a signatory, but definitely they are receiving much larger numbers of Syrian migrants and refugees compared to Egypt.
No, Lebanon has the highest rate in the world of migrants, refugees rate relative to the population, of course.
Right.
Highest, Lebanon followed by Jordan. No, of course, there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done. A lot to be done, whether in integrate, there is quite a body of research on the response of the state in Egypt to refugees, even before the Syrian refugees arrived in Egypt. Refugees from Sudan, South Sudan, from Eritrea, from the Horn of Africa in general. And the project that we have, the entitlements project, looks at different national groups. In fact, imagine that Syrian refugees are even in a better situation than other refugees, the national groups of refugees, because at least they know Arabic. They can be accepted in, of course, in schools that are, everyone knows, far from being satisfactory, not only for the refugees, but even for Egyptians. Egyptians also have to resort to informal education. So, but you have other groups of refugees, Somalis, for instance, Eritreans, they don't even go to school. They're not schooled at all. So there is education, there is health, of course. Since I think 2006 or 8, there is a ministerial decree opening government healthcare facilities to refugees. But we all know how government healthcare facilities are. So the foreigner, and especially the refugee who is in a vulnerable situation, is at a disadvantage with the national, with the local. And the national and the local is himself or herself at a very, very solid situation in respect of healthcare. So imagine the refugee, and right. So it's not a matter of law. This is why we worked on law and on practice. What happens in reality? No, there's a lot to be done, whether it is in education, in healthcare, in registry, for instance. A refugee has to register every 3 months. So she or he receives the authorization, he has to start again applying for the new registration, and so on and so forth. So the life of the refugee, woman or man, is spent, in fact, going to passports administration in order to renew her or his. So whether residence, whether education, whether employment, whether there's really a lot to be done. Now, of course, all parties to the conventions find ways to circumvent conventions. Even industrialized countries close down. And they put all sorts of obstacles in order to make it difficult, if not impossible, for refugees to reach their territories. So this is why Syrian refugees, for instance, had to be smuggled, had to pay thousands and thousands in order to arrive in Europe. Whereas if they could take a plane and claim refugee status, they would not have paid all of this, and they would not have exposed themselves to danger and to the. So there is a lot. States are quite smart in avoiding their international obligations. But
you can call it something other than smart, right?
No, in a sense, it's smart in the sense that, you know, Australia, for instance, has an island which is not Australia, where asylum applications are processed, so that no one can say that Australia practice any refoulement. So before the law, Australia has not violated, has not infringed the convention to which it is party. So there's a lot to be said. And whether in Egypt or outside Egypt, and I think we should continue. Academia on the one hand, civil society on the other hand, activists on the third hand should continue working towards improving the situation of refugees who are, in a way, victims of the international system that looks at individuals as belonging to these units that are nation states.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you for an enlightening session.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Rasha Maati. Thank you very much, Dr. Laila El Baradei, for your interventions. I think our audience has benefited a great deal from your intervention, and I personally thank you, knowing all the work that you do each in her area. So just let me, before coming to an end or putting an end to this webinar, let me remind our audience that our next webinar will be by Dr. Jinan Bastaki, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Public Law, University of the United Arab Emirates. She will talk about de facto measures for de facto refugees, protecting displaced persons in the United Arab Emirates. So we hope to host you again. We hope you will join us for this webinar to see how the Gulf countries are responding to the refugee challenges in our region. Again, thank you very much to both speakers. Thanks very much to our audience, to our students who are here and our audience at large. And I'd like to send a special thanks to my friend Jeff Crisp in Oxford. Good afternoon to all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Rasha.